Have you ever had a moment where everything in your life looked fine, but didn't feel right? Not wrong enough to change, not broken enough to fix, just slightly off. I've had that feeling more than I'd like to admit. Sitting in a place I worked hard to get to, doing the things I thought I was supposed to do, living a life that, on paper, made sense. And still, something felt missing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make me pause and wonder, is this really it? Is this the life I was trying to build? Or just the life I slowly ended up in? Because sometimes, we don't choose our lives all at once. We choose them in small decisions, quiet compromises, subtle adjustments. We say yes when something inside us hesitates. We stay when something in us wants to leave. We keep going because stopping feels uncertain. And over time, those small choices start to form a direction, a path, one that feels familiar, predictable, safe, but not necessarily true. And that's the part that's hard to notice. Because nothing is obviously wrong. You're functioning, you're responsible, you're doing what needs to be done. But there's a quiet question that keeps showing up. Usually when things slow down, usually when you're alone, is this really what I wanted? And maybe you don't answer it. Not because you don't have an answer, but because answering it might change everything. So instead, you move on. You focus on what's in front of you. You stay busy. You keep things going. And for a while, that works. Until it doesn't. Until the question comes back. A little louder. A little harder to ignore. Not in words, but in feeling. A sense that something doesn't fully align. A quiet discomfort you can't explain, but you can't shake either. And I think a lot of people live there, not in a life they hate, but not in a life they truly chose. Just somewhere in between. And maybe that's the hardest place to be. Because it doesn't force you to change. It just slowly reminds you that something's off. And the longer you stay there, the easier it becomes to convince yourself that this is just how life is. That this is normal. That this is what being an adult means. And maybe part of it is, but not all of it. Because deep down, you know the difference between a life that feels right and a life that just works. And maybe you've been ignoring that difference, not because you don't care, but because it's uncomfortable to look at. Because once you admit that something isn't right, you can't unsee it. And then, you're left with a question you can't easily answer. What do I do now? And maybe that's why so many people never ask the question in the first place. Because it's not just about realizing. It's about what comes after. But maybe just noticing it matters more than you think. Maybe the fact that something in you feels out of place means something in you is still paying attention, still awake, still aware enough to recognize what doesn't feel true. And maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's the beginning of something. Not a big change, not a sudden decision, just a shift. A moment where you stop and actually look at the life you're living. Not the version you explain to others, but the one you feel when everything gets quiet. And maybe the question isn't, is this the life you meant to live? Maybe it's, when did you stop asking yourself that? And maybe that's the question that changes everything.